at any of our programs, because I don't know if you're like me in this working through a pandemic from home, you are still on a lot of meetings, and for some reason we've decided that this remote work means that you don't schedule time for yourself to run to the bathroom or get a snack. I'm not really sure how that happened. So we've got folks still joining, so I'm going to give us 2 minutes before we do our full introduction and get us going. All right. Well, I always feel like we should have some kind of welcome or elevator music, so we're going to work on that as we continue our virtual programming options. Once again, my name is Kara Snow, and I keep introducing myself as your virtual facilitator until somebody pointed out 2 days ago that I'm not actually a virtual facilitator. I'm a real live facilitator that just happens to be facilitating a virtual meeting. So I will function in that role today, which means that I get to go over just a couple of our basics for how TAO is putting together our webinars to ensure that there is not a ton of chaos, that we maximize our bandwidth, and that we're able to get everybody talking and asking questions. So I'm really excited to welcome you all to our webinar, Finding Equity When Reshaping Education Delivery. When we put this on the calendar, we were all working under the assumption that school would be back, and I think we are functioning under some different assumptions at this point in the game. So it's a super relevant topic that's becoming more relevant probably by the day, if not by the hour. So I'm going to ask Justin if he can move me on to my next slide. All right, so here are our rules of engagement. All of our attendees have been defaulted to mute. I'm not sure if anyone has experienced the talking over of a virtual meeting, but it can get a little wild. So since we've got 27 and may get a few more, we're going to have everyone muted. Remain muted unless you've been called on or unmuted by us as the host. So you've got myself and Justin Martinez, who is our fantastic events and program coordinator and our recently appointed online community manager. So we will be monitoring the chat, and if you raise your hand to ask a question, we can absolutely get you unmuted. If you prefer to ask a question without having your name associated with it, you can send it directly to me, Kara Snow, once again, and I'll read it out for you. And then our speakers might ask for your participation verbally. So if we do ask, if Adelle does want to open it up to questions, please use the raise hand button to volunteer to speak, and we will unmute you. And you can find that in the participant section. If you close out the chat, along the bottom is your raise hand, yes, no, go slower, go faster, more. So those are our rules of engagement, and we'll go on to the next slide. So there we are. There's your hosts. More fabulous days when we were, outside and enjoying life a little bit larger. But we hope everyone is staying safe, healthy, and well, and being really conscientious of staying home and staying safe. So we will go on to our next slide. But Justin and I are working hard to support you. It's my pleasure to thank Comcast Business for being the sponsor of this virtual series. Ashley Powers is the marketing manager in region, and Comcast has been an amazing supporter of TAO initiatives for many years. When I approached her, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I guess maybe 3 weeks ago, all kind of a blur. It was under the auspice that we would be, staying home for 2 weeks and what kind of virtual programming could we provide. And Comcast and Ashley said, absolutely, our business partners love this, but we don't want it to just be an opportunity for Comcast to talk about our infrastructure and best practices. We'd really like to highlight some of our partners and customers. And so that's what's got us here today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ashley to get us moving forward, and I look forward to chatting with y'all throughout this presentation.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, as Kara said, so TAO and Comcast Business are longtime partners, and Kara approached us about this virtual series with relevant topics of the kind of daily changing landscape that we are in right now. And virtual learning and school has really become a critical conversation. As she mentioned, school may not open back until the fall. As we talk about virtual learning in school, there are challenges with who have access to both devices and internet. And one thing that kind of I'm most proud of as a Comcast employee is the work we do through our Internet Essentials program that really help connect those in our community who otherwise may not have access to internet at home. And so today we are joined by Adelle Pomeroy, the Digital Inclusion Manager with Geek. She's another wonderful Comcast partner. Adelle is an expert in addressing the digital divide, managing 5 community programs, which are community technology education, hardware grants, Plug into Portland, and Welcome to Computers and Tech support. So please welcome me and please join me in welcoming Adelle. I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone. Good morning. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you for hosting TAO and Kara and Justin. As well, thank you to Comcast also. We love being partners with you. It's really awesome to be here, and thanks for having Geek on. So, okay, I will speak up. So Justin, if you could just change this slide. Thank you. What is Geek? It'd be great to know how many of you have heard of Geek, but I haven't actually done a webinar with Zoom before, so I'm trying to figure out a little bit how I can ask a question for you all to respond to without us all sort of talking at once. Would you be able to just chat like a number or that you've heard of us before so I can get a sense here? Nice. So it sounds like a few and used our services. Right on. So it sounds like many of you have heard of us. For some of you that haven't out there, we are a recycling organization that our mission is to bridge the digital divide. So we take the two problems of e-waste and the digital divide, and we sort of point those two issues back at each other. And so we collect e-waste from the community and from community members and refurbish it so that we can give it out to community members through some of our various programs, which I touched on a minute ago, and also through our online sales and our low-cost in-store sales. Obviously, a lot of that is really different now and is changing constantly. I think that the one thing that we can all depend on in this sort of state of being and of life right now is that something will definitely change today, right? So whether it is at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, there's going to be something that changes within your work or your life experience. So Free Geek is definitely feeling that now. And even though our physical store is closed, we still have an online store where low-cost tech is being distributed, and we also still are taking in electronics. And so I just want to start off with that, and I'll talk a little bit more about how our programs are also changing and evolving. But generally speaking, we want digital equity. And so when Free Geek talks about digital equity, there's a bunch of different reasons. Not only has this been something we've fought for through our mission for a long period of time, COVID-19 has really not necessarily changed the amount of inequity that there has been, but definitely brought into high relief and highlighted the digital inequity that exists and the digital divide. It makes us feel great as a nonprofit, definitely, that folks are really listening and paying attention and wanting to do similar things with us. But it also is really challenging because even now there's new and different barriers that folks are experiencing because of our new life situation. So even in the past, just the ways that we communicate and get our news, like this this picture is showing, in our media, and the way that we learn about the latest, health tips that are going on, and what our governor is saying, is not really by paper anymore. It's all through technology. It's all with the internet. The internet has really become a utility and needs to start being viewed more as it is being used by everyone all the time in order to access our basic information, our basic needs, and it really has become one of the most necessary things for us to be able to not only meet our basic human needs, but engage with our communities as well. The next slide is a picture of a report card, and that's just a really old school report card. All of our engagement in our schools, grades are online. Not only that, but our health, everything is online now, and for the foreseeable future will continue to be. So some of you maybe have seen this sort of ubiquitous marketing photo showing products that are being used, these beautiful Macs and tablets and coffee shops. Obviously the coffee shop doesn't make sense anymore, but a lot of times when we're thinking about people connecting to the digital world when they've already or we've already been connected for a while or come from a place of privilege, we're not necessarily thinking about what reality is. And so the way that it's been marketed for a long time is really challenging because folks see just sort of these different images of computers, and this isn't really what reality looks like. So this is a picture of one of our basic digital literacy classes in the past, and obviously because of social distancing, this type of learning is going to be totally different and changing going forward. Some of the things that Free Geek is doing now in order to still serve folks that don't have access to computers, that don't have access to broadband, that don't have digital access. And in just a second, I'll talk about all the things that we determine necessary to be really fully engaged and have access, are going to be really different and change. As you can see, no one in this photo is 6 feet apart. Folks are really close to each other. The way that it was set up is really different. Even just in our smaller examples of the way we've been able to give computers out has been a really interesting and ongoing an ongoing change. But a lot of the challenge with basic digital literacy for adults, at least, has always been that a one-on-one experience is a better experience for adult learning. And so we're finding that the adult learning experience won't be changing too much because the ideal situation is still one-on-one. And now that might just mean that it's going to be by phone or it's going to be a virtual learning experience. So I would like to share with you a couple of statistics that really just indicate the amount of need and the way that folks have engaged with computers in the past. These results aren't the most current, but they are really exemplary of what folks are dealing with now. And so even though I don't think that a lot has necessarily, besides the fact that it's become a lot more necessary more quickly, the digital divide exists as it has always existed. So a lot of US citizens don't, or Americans don't own computers. A lot of Americans don't feel comfortable using a computer. And it's not just any Americans, right? So the data shows that the lines between access to digital tools greatly varies by race, age, income, education, and it's all needs to be really equity focused as we're changing it. We have a really good opportunity moving forward to make sure that the curriculum that we develop for our students and the way that we engage with them online is going to be focused with an equity focus. But yes, this is a huge problem nationally, and it's not really different. So a couple of the things that Free Geek really wants to emphasize is that one of the first things that folks need in order to be able to engage with the digital community is a piece of technology, like a device, or and that could be a computer, it could be a tablet, it can be a smartphone, but you really do need like that physical device in order to access the world. But what is a computer without the internet, right? So without the internet, it's basically a brick that you can use to, hold your door open or stop your paper from flying around, but it's not actually useful. So the other thing that folks need in order to be able to be digitally included is access to the internet. The third thing, because even if you have access to the internet and you have a computer or a device, you need to be able to use those things. So you need to be able to understand how they engage with each other, how you can engage with them, and how, in an ongoing sense, you can be able to continually change and learn new things. And so the third thing that folks need in order to be able to be digitally connected is the skills to use the computer and the internet. And I think that is probably, for us at least as a nonprofit organization, where we're facing the most challenge right now. We also, it doesn't show on the fourth slide that's coming up in a second, but we also think that tech support and warranty is going to be sort of the fourth pillar of digital inclusion, because not only will you need to have education, which is going to be more challenging to disseminate and distribute, access to a device and a computer. Also, if something goes wrong with your computer or your device, really you're going to need to be able to have access to tech support or a warranty. So I would really love to talk about and sort of engage you all in a conversation about what the new barriers look like to vulnerable community members and how we can keep an equity focus while we're developing new curriculum and new ways to engage folks for definitely the education piece, but also how to give out computers and how to make sure folks are connected to computers. Would anyone like to share with us their experience or some stories or things that they have heard that are new barriers to our vulnerable community members just in the last couple of weeks?
Feel free to put that in the chat or raise your hand. Adelle,
I was unmuted by the host, so I assume I should talk. I'm Joe, and I'm actually here in my classroom at Franklin High School, which is gorgeous because you guys are paying taxes. And I just wanted to say hello and thanks for being here. Today, I think the question was something inspiring about access to technology. All right, so I'm going to. So the question, I believe, was an inspiring quick note about access to technology. Okay, great. So I am volunteering since 7 a.m. this morning, and we're giving out Chromebooks to Portland students in high school, and also students who are in the lower grades, like 5th grade and up. They have some access, but today it's more limited. It's just for high school pickup today. And what's most interesting, I think this I learned today, is that for weeks the district has been sending out email saying, if you want access at home and you don't have access at home, just fill out this Google form. And that's a very, I think, closed way of thinking, because guess what? Nobody got that form who didn't have access, because if you're going to email people about lack of access, the people without access are not going to get your email. So most of the kids today, through word of mouth, have heard the district realized a few days ago they were not reaching out with the access that they wanted as their goal for equity. And the district lowered their bar, thankfully, and they just said, if you're a high school student, show up. Even if you don't have your ID, we'll check your picture and just show up from high school, any of the 9 schools, and we'll give you a Chromebook. And that has been 90% of the people who are kids, they're coming here alone, are just showing up, and they're getting a Chromebook, and they've done none of the prerequisites because the prerequisites were a bar too high. So that's my observation, and I'll mute myself. But it's really inspiring to see them smile, and they want to learn, you know. So anyways, that's all.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a wonderful observation, and thank you for sharing it, for sure. We've noticed that depending on the district, not only is sort of the new versions of how we're trying to adjust programming and adjust things is sort of the wild, wild west, but the new, like, depending on the district, the way that they're communicating with families is totally different. And that's definitely one thing I've seen and heard from a lot of people reaching out to Free Geek. But some people will receive emails, some people who don't have devices or the internet, obviously, yes, to your point, won't receive those emails. Some of the districts are now implementing telephone calls in addition to emails for that very reason. We do find a lot of folks have cell phones and cell service, even in the most digitally divided communities. And so hopefully they are able to access those emails. But again, it's totally dependent on the survey, right? And so if the survey sent out is not mobile friendly, or many different websites are not mobile friendly, and so folks really don't have the same kind of access. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about a little more later on, and so it'd be lovely to hear from you again. But just the ways in which you know, the Oregon Department of Education is able to, and districts are able to sort of say things that are really wonderful, with really wonderful intentions, but then not necessarily realizing the barriers that they're going to experience when reaching out to these community members that traditionally haven't had that access.
Adele, I'm going to unmute Lexi really quick, and then Kara has a couple of questions in the chat.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lexi. I actually was working with Joe last week cleaning and sanitizing computers at Grant High School. So I actually have a bit of a different perspective. Hi, Joe. I actually work for the district. So he's working in the schools, and I do work in the schools as well, but I work also for the district. And so I also get the joy of seeing the other part of the communication that kind of trickles to other directions, and then I get something that trickles down to me. But I would say probably one of the biggest barriers and challenges that we're having is I mean, definitely getting computers to students is a challenge. But right now what we have set up across the district is 15 different nutrition hubs where families can go and pick up food. And then we're trying to use that location also as a place to communicate anything else that we possibly can while simultaneously trying not to overwhelm families. That is definitely a risk, is if you have someone coming, you're so excited they're there, you want to give them everything, and it becomes very overwhelming very quickly. So one thing we've been trying to do is limit that messaging, really targeting in on just a few messages, but the messages that we know we really, really want to get through to people. And then also having other optional resources for people so that they can take those if they are something that they're interested in, and it's not something we're necessarily cramming down people's throats. So something that I'm doing specifically right now is working with Multnomah County Health Department to put together 2-page flyers for families. We offer it online, but we also offer it in paper form. And we're trying to do something similar for the content that we're delivering to students, but we're finding it's really difficult, because you can have a lecture online, you can have a really engaging, wonderful experience with your students online, and then you have students that have none of that, and even if you give them a computer, they either have difficulty with connectivity, they're experiencing houselessness, they don't have electricity, they don't have a safe environment where they can be, and so it's just unrealistic to expect them to meet all of these benchmarks that you're trying to set up. It's just not, it's unfair from the beginning. So what we're trying to do is to provide paper handouts, and then also have the phone numbers of teachers available, so that if the student wants to call the teacher and communicate with them, that's something we're trying to work towards. But it's such an enormous task with 50,000 students in like 1 week to kind of figure your shit out. It's very difficult. So excuse my language, but it's been an interesting few weeks. But I'm happy to hear that Joe is having a really good experience with the kids in person, because I don't get to see that, and so I'm very happy. Yay, Joe! So thank you so much.
Lexi, there's a question in the chat if those materials are they being translated?
Oh yeah, 5. There are 5 languages that are within PPS. They're the required 5 languages, and we are translating those in for them to be able to have. And it's new content. It should be new content each week.
Lexi, that's wonderful to hear, and I am really happy to hear that you're printing out materials and distributing them at places where folks can, meet their basic human needs as well, like food and housing and health. So that's definitely one of the strategies that Free Geek is also using. And so I'd love to brainstorm, later at the end of this webinar or at another point in time. It'd be wonderful to hear from all of you that are on the call, because you'll have different perspectives on different ways that we can be more engaging without necessarily, using the internet and using phones. I think that printed materials and making sure that we're using, simple language and not overwhelming people with so much information, just like you're saying, is a wonderful strategy that will definitely be used going forward for sure.
And this is Kara. I'm going to pop in and say, Lexi, we have yet to have a virtual meeting at TAO where someone has not used the word shit. So I just think it's a sign of the times, and we're not regulated by the FCC, thank God. I'm going to maybe call on Rebecca Brown, and Justin, if we can unmute you. And Rebecca, I hate to put you on the spot, but I think you're doing some really great answers in the chat that seem pretty relevant. So if you're comfortable with it, I'll have Justin unmute you, and maybe you can tell us what you do with Comcast and some of the questions that you're answering over here.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay. Yes, so I was answering a couple questions came through the chat. If not, everybody's looking around the Internet Essentials program that we do offer sort of to low-income households. And one of the sort of eligibility requirements through that program in sort of a quote-unquote normal environment was that applicants couldn't have debt less than a year owed to Comcast. If it was over a year, we would waive it, go through an amnesty program, but less than a year it would not. And right now we have removed that barrier. So through May 13th at this time, anyone that does apply, and if they do have debt less than a year, they will also go through the amnesty program, and we will clear that debt. I think another question, as we all know, I mean, yes, data in the homes is being accessed so much more heavily than it has in the past. And through an act that several providers have signed onto through the FCC, we have committed to removing those data caps. So There are several providers, I'm sure beyond Comcast, that we will not charge if you go over that data.
And Rebecca, is there a URL that you can post in the chat for the amnesty program?
Yes, I'll put information and link. It's actually just on our Internet Essentials website, so that's what I'll include in the chat box.
Awesome. Thank y'all for your engagement. I've got a couple of comments and then another question or two for Adele before we hand it back over for some more presentations. Tracy made the comment that the increase in misinformation is a huge problem and concern, which I think we can all agree with. And then Bridget pointed out that rural communities and a lack of broadband is also particularly challenging. There was a great story on OPB, it was perhaps 2 nights ago, that the Bandon School District, which I think is a little under 1,000 students, realized that this was going to be a challenge, and so they actually were one of the first adopters in the state of how are they going to do virtual learning, and will be flexible with that term virtual. So their solution for families that were not internet accessible is they are actually printing the work, using the bus routes with the drivers in some personal protective equipment to bring assignments out to the students in the Bandon School District. Then the schoolwork gets picked back up. I'm not sure if they're doing this daily or weekly on the same route in boxes labeled high school, middle school, and elementary school. The work is dropped off. A few essential workers in the school in full gowns, masks, and gloves are scanning in the assignments because they confirm that teachers have access to the internet throughout their district, and teachers are grading work and being able to respond and come up with curriculum plans that way. I actually thought that was a fairly innovative solution. Was super impressed to hear that it was going on in Oregon. So I just thought I'd share that because that's one of the ways that some of our rural communities are addressing this statewide. A question for you, Adele, that came in, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but it kind of aligns with the slide you have up. What kind of support do you have for students with special needs, English language learners? I think some of that was maybe addressed in the chat with Lexi, but what are you seeing from a Free Geek perspective?
Yeah, of course. So definitely students with special needs, we have been, and I'm excited to, well, I'm happy to share a few impact stories later on as well, but we definitely are getting requests from families with students with special needs, and a lot of those students need computers that are different, right? And so one-on-one consultations and case-by-case consultations are absolutely essential for students that have special needs. We've been working with the Oregon Commission for the Blind and a couple of other nonprofits that serve folks with low vision or blindness. And there basically just isn't a workaround for using specific devices. And so those students will need to have access to a higher, like a more expensive technology. And that in and of itself is like equity in its purest form, right? So not every student is going to receive equal materials. They're not going to receive the same things, but they will receive the things that allows them to participate fully. And so I think that especially in terms of serving folks that need extra things, in order to be able to participate equally with everyone else, there should just be an allowance for that. And I know that a lot of the surveys that are going out are finding out sort of what is the access in the household, but I think another person earlier made a point that a lot of families and communities are using, or when the question is, do they have access? They do have access, but it might only be through a mobile phone or a device. And so they're not necessarily saying, what kind of access do you have? And so that's an important question that does need to continually be asked, because we're also finding out that the type of access and the amount of access, not through just a mobile phone or through a tablet or something, is really important for those most vulnerable communities, especially for students that are special needs learners, and additionally, if folks have health needs. So a lot of organizations cannot bill for telehealth appointments if there isn't a video feed. And so if a device that you have is a desktop computer, but it doesn't have a webcam, or it's a laptop computer, but the webcam is not there or broken, then your health provider might not be able to set up a telehealth appointment with you at all. And so a lot of requests that we have coming in are from health providers and from clinics that are trying to set their community members up with devices that they would be able to use webcams on, because that's really essential to them now. And then I think just to the sort of Comcast Internet Essentials speed point that another person was making in the chats, or another comment that came up, I think it will be really important for our school districts and the Oregon Department of Education, as we are developing new curriculum, making sure that it is at the lowest speed sort of threshold, right? So not necessarily that we're providing always printed materials, although that's a wonderful plan. It's not super sustainable for folks to be driving printed materials out daily or weekly, depending on how that goes. I do think it will be necessary at some point to figure out how to get broadband to those communities. But that's a wonderfully creative idea, and a lot of this is really being creative for the time being until we can get the funding and infrastructure in place to have everyone on the same page. But especially as we're creating new curriculum for folks, making sure that if there is a family that is on Comcast Internet Essentials, and they're on that speed together, and there's two parents working from home from a device, and there's one or two kids, and they're all trying to use webcams, for example, their speed might not be able to support that. And so recognizing the ways that we can develop curriculum that doesn't require really high speed or a high capacity internet in a home would be really valuable as we're moving forward to try to reduce those barriers.
Adelle, I'm not sure if you saw this. Great question. And I have a feeling you're probably more of an expert than anyone on this call. What are we doing about homeless, houseless students?
Definitely for homeless students and for houseless students, it's not the same, but it's similar to students with special needs. For most students, what Free Geek is able to provide is a desktop computer with a webcam and speakers. If a student tells us that they are houseless or homeless, we're going to try to be providing them with much more mobile technology. And so we would want to be providing them for sure with a laptop that they would be able to take to shelters to be able to charge there, working with social service agencies to potentially be connecting them with other organizations that can help them find, at the very least, a place they would be able to charge and connect to the internet to be able to continue working. But I think that in this situation, it really takes a lot of referrals and community partner support of each other to be able to provide those wraparound services that are going to be necessary.
Thanks, Adelle. I want to be sensitive to time too, so I want you to be able to go through the rest of your presentation, because for the business folks out there, I know that we maybe have some asks and some creative things that we want to share at the end. So I'm going to take a pause on questions and let you continue.
All right. I love the conversation we're all having together, and so I encourage folks to keep asking questions, and I'm happy to share all of my information so that we can continue offline conversations as well, like later this week or next week. So a lot of other things, if we go on to the next slide, something that I would also like us to consider as we're moving forward in this new age of COVID-19. I talked a little bit about telehealth, but basic human needs are going to be prioritized. And so if you're thinking about a vulnerable community and our basic human needs were met by, food pantries or applications for housing are pretty much all online. Going to the bank is online. Finding out your news and information. If you're laid off, you're going to be applying for jobs online. If any of these things are happening to you and there has been a single computer provided to your home, potentially for your student to be educated, most humans will be prioritizing their basic human needs. So just keeping in mind that even if we're providing, one computer or one device to a family, and if it's their only one in their household, they will probably need another device so that they are able to prioritize, feeding their children over educating their children. And I think that it's just a really impossible fact that every type of application is really online now. And if work hours and school hours overlap and there's only one device, potentially providing, just like this webinar is recorded classes so students can access those at different times of the day, and recognizing that each device could be really multi-use that we're providing to a family. And the next slide, you'll see an image of social distancing. And so there's a couple of new practices that we're trying to do. Geek is actually a picture of me and some students from Roosevelt High School with a few of the folks that we've been speaking to. The need for a device in the long term is important, but a couple of other folks who've been engaging with have a more urgent need. And so we were reached out to by a teacher at one of these at a school, and she indicated that the students would be having testing, and that the tests would be happening in May and the test date hadn't been changed, right? So the students in her class would be disadvantaged because the testing organization provided online learning materials, but not all of her students had computers to be able to practice. And so she immediately saw a disadvantage of weeks of studying with those specific students for these tests in comparison to any student that had a computer at home already. And so in this case, they are part of Portland Public Schools. And so because I've definitely have been in conversations or hearing from communications from Portland Public Schools that they will be giving out devices, it wasn't necessarily that the students wouldn't be receiving a device ever, but that they needed to have a device sooner so that they wouldn't be as far behind and affected by not having a device as quickly. And I think that Geek for the moment is still positioned because we're such a small entity. We're positioned to be able to serve people's immediate needs. A couple of other things that this image makes me think of is just physical space. And so especially when we're having webcam use, talking about houseless students or homeless students from before, if we have webcam use for the classes, it might be valuable for the instructor to be able to see the students, but to have them have a window into each other's homes or lack thereof could put vulnerable students at more risk of feeling ashamed or being bullied, and just things that would be valuable to think about. Even students that I grew up with sharing a bedroom with two siblings, and it's not like my family would have had an office space for us to be learning in, and so just keeping in mind that video of the inside of homes and of students is really challenging, even though it could be valuable for the instructors to be able to see the engagement and see the students to engage them. It could be a lot more risky and harmful to vulnerable populations. The next slide is really just, I kind of just wanted to speak to patience in this slide. I know that everyone is working really hard, and that there's a lot of really good intentions, but kind of like Lexi was speaking to earlier, it all has been happening very fast. And so even while Free Geek is positioned to be able to help people immediately, it's just because we're really small, frankly. And we know that the school districts are really doing good work and trying to get devices out to students. But this is just a good example of how they're also hearing news and trying to act on it as immediately as they can. And this quote came from a technology infrastructure specialist who's working in a school district, in a local school district. And so everyone's feeling pretty overwhelmed with this, and folks are working hard. And I found that when you reach out to school districts and you reach out to folks, a lot of the time they do respond and they are interested in helping out. And so just assuming best intent and then realizing that the reality for us all to catch up to this really important new virtual education and learning experience is going to take some time to figure out.
And Adele, this is Kara. I'm going to interrupt you because there's a note in here in the chat. I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but the shift from paper to pencil to online statewide assessment has resulted in a significant drop in scores across the entire nation. As it's pointed out, digital native is not equal to digital literate, and this has been a significant issue for grades 3 through 8. So I think that intention versus reality in going from pen to paper to online is going to produce some really different results than maybe were anticipated.
Definitely. Definitely, and I think that some of the ways that we are talking about trying to engage folks, like Free Geeks classes, I showed you an image earlier, are really, they were really different than they're going to be in the future. And we know that adults and students often learn really positively in a one-on-one scenario. And some of the strategies that we're considering more and more are working with our community partners like Multnomah County Library and Metro East to train more trainers so that it's not necessarily going to be a really high ratio of students to instructors with adults or with children, but it will be a lower ratio and just training more community partners and more organizations and more individuals who would like to learn how to train basic digital literacy to do that so that it can be a more one-on-one and individualized assistance process. So if we look at the next slide, I'd like to share a couple of impact stories. In the past, we're getting a lot of the same impact stories that we were getting before COVID-19, parents trying to get computers for their students. A lot of the things that have changed now, I would say, are that students are more in need to be able to learn online. A lot of requests we're getting are from healthcare providers on behalf of their patients, so that their patients can continue their healthcare assessments and their healthcare appointments as they were doing before. A lot of requests we're getting are from social workers on behalf of clients as well. And especially the social workers who are serving, primarily homeless and previously homeless folks who only have smartphones or are on a fixed income, who are really feeling that that complete disconnect right now. We still are getting, obviously, a lot of requests from parents and family members about kids, but one thing that we've definitely been able to do and continue to do, and it sounds like also from the story earlier that some school districts are doing, is not requiring income evaluations and not requiring folks to prove certain things. So when folks reach out to us, we usually don't need to ask for proof of income or proof that they are eligible for our programs. We can just give them the things that they're requesting. A lot of our requestees are really honest with their situations. We do have folks that say, like in an email to us, you know, to be honest, I think that there are others with greater financial need than I have. And in that case, we do refer them to our low-cost online store so they can still have low-cost technology, but they're purchasing it and leaving more computers and technology available for folks that aren't able to be in that situation to purchase something for free to provide free computers too. So I guess what I would like to talk about in the last few minutes is what Free can do for you. And just with the caveat of we don't know how our programs are going to continue to change in the future. We definitely are working already to bring our classes online, to be able to provide those online. There's obviously a lot of barriers with only having classes online versus in person that we used to have before. We are providing still tech support and warranty with any device that we give out to folks for a year, give out for free for a year. And a lot of times we found that phone support is incredibly necessary and, you know, time consuming. And so we're training a lot of our volunteers to be able to provide more technology phone support. And then thinking creatively going forward. My teams are still brainstorming, and we would love to hear from any other organization or individual person who has ideas about, you know, instead of having a lecture series, maybe have like an AMA or an Ask Me Anything, so that we can have a technician from Geek live responding to folks' questions that they submit, or creating simple infographics using images and cartoons so that we can start engaging people with basic digital literacy again who, you know, haven't used a mouse before or don't know how to use a keyboard. Those folks are, I think, going to be the most challenging to continue to reach out to because you won't be able to connect them with free online classes. And so please feel free to, you know, send folks our way and refer folks to us that do need computers. We're still definitely giving away free computers. We're also providing low-cost computers and brokering deals with organizations who maybe can pay for a couple of computers, but not the entirety of what they need to serve their community. And we're working with them to make sure that we can be of the most service that we can. Feel free to email this address that you see on the slide there with any ideas that you have. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit more, but I know it's getting close to the end, and I'm not sure if there are specific wrap-up things we're supposed to do.
Well, Adelle, I have a couple more questions for you that are kind of some action item oriented, and I'd also like to really thank Comcast again and Rebecca Brown in particular, who's answering a whole bunch of questions on the chat. I see Joe has his hand raised, but I'm going to ask one question really quickly prior. We get a lot of questions from a TAO standpoint, since our members are tech and tech enabled. What if we want to donate computers and hardware? How can we do that? And is there a cleaning practice or a security procedure that Free Geek can share? Because we've heard that sometimes hard drives are removed from the equipment, which then makes it not super valuable for you to give back out. And then you're having to pay for hard drives. So it kind of, it's great that you're getting some equipment, but it's still incurring a cost that you may not need to incur based on your process. So I'd love to answer that question before we let Joe ask his final question.
Totally. Actually, I stopped just before that slide, and so if we continue on to the next one, we have been practicing what I like to call sanitization 2 ways. So this is a picture of our lovely refurbishment manager. And so we are definitely following the Oregon Health Authority best practices for cleaning. We're wiping our technology down, and then before we ship it out, as well as before we give it out in person. We also practice security and data sanitization. And so especially when folks give us devices that are data bearing, they are immediately routed to our secure data area for data destruction. We practice National Institute Standards of Technology, and so we practice all NIST standards and strictly adhere to those. I would say we also do offer a certificate of data destruction. Those, like you mentioned, are slightly less useful for us because we know that we're already destroying data to a NIST standard and the International Secure Information and Governance Management Association. We're also NAID membership, and so if it's possible to retain the integrity of the hard drive, it's much better for us because then we don't have to purchase a lot of new hard drives to go into computers. And so I'd be more than happy to share, and this is also, especially if you have data concerns, on our website in the donate technology section, there is a whole, it goes into a lot more detail than I am qualified to talk about necessarily, about how and why we sanitize the way that we do. And so I encourage folks that do have concerns about their data before they recycle with us, they can take a look at that page, and they're welcome to email us with any questions that they have about it, just so that they know that their data is safe with us.
Awesome, Adele. That's great for us to share, and perhaps we can coordinate with somebody on the Free Geek team to get that onto our blog as well and get it shared out to our folks in the ecosystem. Justin, is it possible for you to unmute our last question?
Do you want me, Joe, to go ahead? I unmuted myself.
Oh, perfect.
I'm Joe. I'm at Franklin High School, and I have a concern that I'd really like a coalition of like Free Geek. And when I arrived in San Francisco, I got a tech job, and I volunteered for many years with a group called CompuMentor. They became TechSoup. So I think on the West Coast we have this incredible platform that we're not using, and here's what we're not using it for. And that I teach students to rebuild their computers, and I have a lot of students who would rather rebuild their own computer at home. And many of those students like to wipe their computer, rebuild it with Linux, but Linux doesn't run some educational apps. And I think one of the barriers I see is that corporate partners are still being uncooperative with the equity formula. So I would like to see Microsoft stop nickel and diming people for a Windows 10 license. Like if a student wants to wipe their computer and reinstall Windows 10, they shouldn't get, a paywall where they have to pay $300 for a Windows key. And this, I've been battling Microsoft forever. I even emailed Melinda Gates after meeting her once. And it just ran into, she was so nice to me in person, but then in reality just kind of let the issue drop. So Microsoft is just one example. It isn't just Microsoft. It's a general trend amongst corporate companies that partner with Free Geek, that partner with TechSoup, that partner with, Seattle has their own organization. And I'd like to see these two sides just agree that they're going to stop nickel and diming the e-waste problem. So I'm wondering, same thing with Comcast is doing great things. But for a long time, Comcast had a paywall up where if you weren't the perfect Comcast customer and you fell on low income, my Franklin students were locked out of the Comcast low income program because their parents put food ahead of the internet bill for a month, and now they're penalized forever. But I'm glad Comcast has an amnesty program now. But I'd like to see CenturyLink expand their program. I'd like to see Step House. Everyone who talks the talk, walk the walk. And I'd like Free Geek to get a little tougher. I'd like TechSoup to get tougher. So that's my pitch. And I think Tao can be on the coalition on what I would consider the equity persuaders. Does that make any sense? I want the people in power like TechSoup, Free Geek, Tao to really be like, let's make actions and words into actions. So I would like, right now, I'd like someone to give me 10 free Windows licenses so I can give those to my students so they can rebuild their Windows 10 machines. And that's all I have to say.
Joe, I think you make a really good point, and I think that's definitely something we've been striving for. I'd like to, at the City of Portland, there's a organization or a community collaborative called the Digital Inclusion Network. And a lot of the work that we're doing, that Free Geek is doing with them, is around how we can develop legislature and how we can develop rules and make it into more, a lot of the work that we're doing in some aspects is putting like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, right? So I think that a lot of the structural inequity does need to be addressed. It's the Digital Inclusion Network. I can send you the URL. But a lot of the things that we do need to think about are how we can really, fix this in the long term. And I think that a lot of that is going to come through new laws and regulations and legislature changes.
Joe, thank you so much. I'm not sure if DIN has a website, but Adelle, I think we are on an email distribution list, but I'm not sure that DIN has a link, but we can direct you to the NDIA, which is the National Digital Inclusion, I think it's Association, and that's who we partner with. TAO is a part of that as well. So we appreciate the feedback, and we do work with a bunch of those companies, and so we'll make sure that we share that up the chain. And unfortunately, I have to end us because, so Joe still asked me a question. Will Free Geek and TAO go to bat for equity? We do every day. We also are both nonprofits, so we're struggling to keep our employees safe and paid too. We can absolutely put a question to Gates to give free keys to install. We're also actually working on something I didn't get to share. We're working with Portland Public Schools on an idea for private citizens to open up a part of their network, if possible, for student use, something that we hope can go nationwide. So continue to expect to see things like that. And we'll ask hard questions. We may not get any response back from Melinda or Bill either, but we will at least put it to the constituency out there. And we'll get the NDIA link. We will also send out all the other links that we'll put in the chat that were shared. That'll come out in your survey feedback. So even if you don't answer the survey, which we hope you do, and Joe, again, will capture your request there if you want to put them in that survey. The links for all the information that was shared will be there as well. Obviously, this is a great, important topic, so we may see if we can leverage Adelle again, who has done a fabulous job. I'm not sure how you give a virtual round of applause. I have a sound app, but my team told me yesterday it sounds absolutely wretched over the phone, so I'm going to spare all of your eardrums that noise. But we'll see if we can get more of this programming out since it's critical. And then Adelle alluded to it, but we do have a virtual health event that we will have coming up on April 21st, and we'll make sure to include some of the equity questions in there. And thanks for letting us go a few minutes over. We really appreciate everyone. We appreciate all the work that y'all are doing, and thank you so much for staying safe, staying home, and continue to be well. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. That was fun.